Okay, today we're going to be talking about the Golden Spike. The Golden Spike represents the Transcontinental Railroad, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. As you can see here, they start from Omaha, Nebraska, and start making their way west, and they start in Sacramento, California, and start making their way east, and they're going to meet in Utah. And so this was a two-part project, obviously, that was started in 1860. And, the Pony Express, they would ride on horses to carry messages or packages. So if you wanted to send, let's say, some chairs to somebody, putting it on a horseback is not a very good idea. And they can only carry so much and go so fast. So the best way to do them, you could put it on a wagon with horses, but again, it's very slow going. You're going about walking pace or so, and it takes months to transport just a little bit of things from east to west. This country is very large, as you can see. So they decide to make a transcontinental railroad that's going to go all the way from the east to all the way to California, and they got to get through the Rocky Mountains. So they want to get to California because of all the gold that's being found here in California. And so because of the gold rush of 1849, they're starting to make these railroads out there, and so they need to connect. Oh, before I go on, in our worksheet, we have this right here. This is how we're going to be taking notes from now on. We're going to have 3 columns that you're going to put in your notes. And the first one is going to be the passage and page. So you can see the Golden Spike opening paragraph, page 52. And so this is the Golden Spikes. This is what you're going to write in that first column. And of course, it's page 52 down here. And so that's what we write in this first box. In the second box, once we read it, we're going to summarize what we read. So in 1860, a plan was created to link the east and west with a railroad. Progress started slowly. Okay? Something simple, just a sentence or two that summarizes this first passage right here. Okay? So that's what we're doing. And then in my reflections, in this last one, how quickly was the track laid? Started in 1860. Did they use slaves? Railroad reminds me of the rivers that linked the country earlier. These are just your thoughts as you read through it, things that are not directly related, but you might have a question, you might have an opinion about something, and so my reflections is where you're going to put those thoughts. Okay, so this is how we're going to be taking notes from now on. So obviously, on the next section, Across Gold Mountain, as we see here, Across Gold Mountain, page 52. So we're going to write in this box, across Gold Mountain, page 52. Okay, and then we're going to write our summary of what we read here, and then our thoughts in this section right here. Okay, and you can do that on your own. All right, so Across Gold Mountain. Because that gold rush, people are trying to get to California, and so people thought that this was a really good idea to set up this railroad. And so starting in California, this is near the Pacific, and so a lot of people are coming over from China, Japan, and the Chinese have a lot of experience with explosives. Gunpowder was originated there, and so they come over, and they're not afraid of the explosives, so they're willing to do a lot of the demolition to bust through the mountains, okay? Because the mountains, you're not going to dig through that solid rock very easily, and so you have to dig a little bit and put some explosives in there and blow it out, and then clean out the rubble, and then continue your tunnel, because they can't just go over the mountains all the time. Sometimes they have to go through the mountains. And here's an example of that sometimes they would be off these cliffs, they would dig into the side of the mountain and put explosives there so they can start blasting through the mountain. Otherwise, this railroad would never have taken shape. Okay? And then we go over to through snow and heat. And when you go up into the mountains, obviously you look at the mountains, you see snow there. It's going to be cold. But there were places that they had to go through the Basin Range where it's very hot. And so they would go through the cold weather, and then in other areas they're going through very hot, not a lot of water areas, and so they had to bring in the water. They had to keep replacing their workers that may have died or that just couldn't take it anymore. And what made it even worse, in that winter of 1866, hold on, to 1867, they had 44 major snowstorms to slow them down. Sometimes they would have 40-foot high snowdrifts. And so 1,200 men died working on the railroad just in that one winter. And so then they work into the Nevada desert where it gets really hot, and they have to bring in water. And they brought in Pueblo Indians to help the Chinese workers that they brought in to go through all the searing heat that they would have to face. Okay, and then finally, East meets West. They're able to connect, excuse me, coming from Omaha, Nebraska, and Sacramento, California. They meet up in Utah, and so they, in Promontory Point, Utah, right here. And so they're racing to those two railroad companies are racing to this point, and they see who can lay the most track in one day and in the time period. And finally, on May 10th, 1869, just 9 years after they figured out that they want to do this, and really 7 years after they started laying tracks, and this was way ahead of schedule. They thought it was going to take a lot longer. And so they were able to have a celebration. They had several spikes, special ones made, 2 gold from California, 1 silver, and 1 iron. And so they drove the spikes in, and people would go looking for these golden spikes, but they pulled them out and put in regular spikes, so there was really no golden spikes that they left there. It was just for the ceremony. And Golden Spike Day was a huge day. It was a national holiday. And people were very, very proud that they were able to make this this transcontinental railroad. Now, 3 things that made this very important, this transcontinental railroad, was that you didn't have to ride on horseback anymore to get across the country. You could start taking trains. Trains were much faster, more safe. You didn't, what if you were sick, or your horse got sick or tired? That's going to mess you up. But a train is going to take you across, and train tracks are constantly being traveled. So this was a big deal for people in the West. All those goods in the East Coast now could be sold on the West Coast and vice versa. All that gold that was coming from California can now flow to the East and buy a whole bunch of things, and then people in the East can make it and send it to them very easily. Couldn't do that if you're putting stuff on a horse or a wagon, but on a train you can carry lots of things, very large things across country. And then finally, communications. Don't underestimate how important communications are to a country. If the West Coast, you look at over here, if these people in California are starting to have their own culture, they have no connection to the East, then our cultures start to diverge, and we basically become 2 different countries. And without that line of communication that a railroad brings, without the news coming back and forth very quickly, we start to develop into another country on the West Coast, and that would be very bad for our country. It causes disunity. So having that line of communication was very, very important to the health of the country. And that's about it. Just remember those 3 things that the railroad is really good for, and that it took less than a decade for us to make a railroad that spanned from east to west across the Rocky Mountains.